Good to be here. There's a variety of different ages here, so I'm going to try to keep this complicated subject as simple as I can. Pastor said that I'm a lawyer. That's not the normal word that we use. We say attorney at law. So when you get a degree in college to become a lawyer, it's called an attorney at law. But nobody uses that. It's lawyer. So I'll be using the phrase being a lawyer. And I'm going to first talk about the law, which controls all of your activities in society and some of your activities at home in the family. And then I will talk about how you become a lawyer, how I became a lawyer, and what I did as a lawyer when I was practicing here in San Luis Obispo. And the third thing I will talk about is how you can be a servant to the Lord and be a lawyer at the same time, and how you can use your faith to be an effective lawyer but also help your clients. Okay? First, let me talk about the law. And some of this is a little complicated, so I'm going to just try to keep it in a couple simple ways. There are two kinds of laws. Two. The first one's called civil law. The other one's called criminal. All of the laws are divided into either civil laws or criminal laws. Now, and some people who practice one, we call them civil lawyers. And others we call criminal lawyers, because that's what they focus on the most. Legally, you can do both, but most people just focus on one or the other. Civil law are guides for everybody in society. For example, you have laws that tell you in some circumstances you have to wear a mask. A law is kind of like a rule. The Ten Commandments given to Moses were laws, rules. Well, all of your behavior in society is controlled by laws. People enter into contracts where one person contractually is obligated to work for another one. Lawyers draft those pieces of paper. You have to go usually to a lawyer if you're going to buy some big piece of property, and he writes up all of the paperwork and the legal documents that are used in real estate law. There are laws that deal with who gets the water that falls out of the sky and ends up in the lakes and the rivers. We call that water rights laws. Somebody has to decide who gets that water. How much of it goes to the ocean? How much goes down to Los Angeles to feed those people and provide water for them and for their crops? When you want to do your will to decide how you're going to leave your estate to your children, you go to a lawyer who prepares the will. All of these things are civil laws, and they deal with relationships between people in society. If you want to set up a business, you go to a business lawyer. If you want to start a corporation, you go to a corporate lawyer. There are just as many types of lawyers as there are types of doctors. You know, there's all kinds of doctors. Doctors that deal with your feet, your nose, your lungs, your cancer, diseases, vaccinations, all types of doctors. Well, there's also lots and lots of different kinds of lawyers that practice one or the other. of these types of areas. There are lawyers that deal with who gets the oil under the ground. There are laws that deal with the emissions out of your car. There are laws that deal with everything you can think of that orders your life. There are laws that tell you that you have to go to school. There are laws that say all kinds of things that regulate your life. Most of those are called civil laws. A lot of civil law does not end up in a courtroom. When you think of lawyers, you think of going to court. Well, a lot of civil law is negotiation, writing documents. A lot of civil lawyers never go to court in their whole lifetime. They say that about half of the people who graduate from law school never ever go in a courtroom. Most people think that's what lawyers do, is go to court. That isn't always true. Now let me say a word about criminal law. Here's what's a distinction between civil and criminal. Criminal laws deal with punishment for doing bad things. Okay? For committing crimes. Often, if you're involved in a criminal law, somebody's been arrested for a crime. They might be in jail. So there are 3 levels of criminal laws. The lowest level of criminal law is called an infraction. The next level is called a misdemeanor, and the highest level of crime is called a felony. What is an infraction? An infraction is something where you can only be punished with a fine. For example, if you run a red light and a police officer stops you for running a red light, he can write you a ticket. But you can't go to jail for it. It's called an infraction. Okay? Something that punishes you, but you don't have to go to jail is called an infraction. That's the key thing about an infraction. It can't involve jail time. But you can be punished for all kinds of violations of codes and rules and how you build your house and all kinds of things that are infractions. You can be fined for it, but you won't go to jail. Next level is misdemeanor. A misdemeanor can involve jail time up to 1 year in the county jail. That's the most that can be involved in a misdemeanor, is 1 year in the county jail. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody who commits a misdemeanor goes to jail. It doesn't mean you go for a year. If it's your first drunk driving case, you may end up in jail for 2 days. If it's your third drunk driving case, you may end up in jail for 3 months. The top level of crime or criminal violations called a felony. These are the bad cases. These are the ones that involve robberies, burglaries, shootings, violence, theft, big theft, bank robbery, all the way up to murder. These are the big ones that often end up in trial and you read about in the newspaper. They're called felonies. Anytime that it can involve more than 1 year in jail, it's called a felony. And some felonies can involve 5 years in jail or prison, 10, 20, all the way up to life, or even in some states, the death penalty for the worst crimes. Okay. Now, there's another interesting and different thing about criminal cases. In criminal cases, the state of California hires people to prosecute these crimes. That means take them to court and try to convince a jury or a judge the person did the crime and deserved to be punished for the crime. The person on the other side who represents the person charged with the crime who's been arrested is called the defense attorney. The defense attorney can be paid for with money if he has a lot of money, But a lot of the defendants who are charged with crimes, they don't have any money. So what happens to them? They still get a lawyer. They get a lawyer paid for by the state. The person who defends those people are called public defenders. All of the states in the United States have these kinds of laws. They all have prosecutors who are called district attorneys who prosecute the cases, and they have public defenders and defense attorneys. Every state does. Most of the criminal laws are based on states passing laws. Now, the federal government also has a whole set of laws that deal with violations of federal laws, but there's not much involvement in your day-to-day life that deals with federal crimes. Okay. Now, how do you become a lawyer? Well, it generally takes 7 years of college. You will go to college and get your undergraduate degree, which is 4 years of college. And then you go to what's called law school, which is 3 years. 3 years of law school. And then the final step is, no matter what state's involved, you have to pass a very complicated exam that takes 3.5 days. Straight, 3.5 solid days of writing and answering questions and doing essays. The exams are very difficult. Only about half the people who take it pass. So you may spend 3 years in law school and take the exam, and if you don't pass, you don't get to practice law. Some people take it many times and don't pass. So you may have to look for another occupation. How did I become a lawyer? I went to University of the Pacific in Stockton for 4 years. Then I went to UC Davis for 3 years to law school, took the bar exam, passed the exam, and came to San Luis Obispo to become a lawyer. What type of law did I practice? Well, I did all types of what's called litigation. A person who goes to court a lot is called a litigator. A person who ends up in front of a judge or a jury and is either defending someone or on the opposite side. Either the plaintiff in a case or a defendant in the case. A litigator is a person who's a mouthpiece. It's a person who goes to court a lot. Like I said, a lot of lawyers never go to court. In fact, I've known hundreds of lawyers who are scared to death to go to court. But then I was just the opposite. I was a person who was in court all the time. Now, let's get down to what lawyers do, and what does it have anything to do with being a Christian? Let me throw out a little quiz. Who do you think about it, who was the first lawyer you can think of? Think of a story. Pastor.
Teacher asked me, Moses?
No, the lawyer was Aaron. He was the client. Okay, do you know the story? Do you remember? All the people from Israel, there had been a bad famine. And Joseph first, but then his family and all the people of Israel moved into Egypt. Remember? Because they had food. And then they lived there for a long time. By the time they were ready to leave, they were up to 1 million people. And God came down to Moses, remember, and said, "Let my people go. We're getting the people out of Egypt to take them to the promised land." And did Moses want to do it right away?
No.
No, he didn't want to do it. He made every excuse he could think of. And what was his final excuse? His final excuse was, "I can't speak very well. I'm not a good talker. And if I've got to go convince the Pharaoh to let the people go, I don't think I could handle that." But God wouldn't accept that, so he gave him a lawyer. His brother, Aaron. Yes?
Wouldn't that make Abraham a lawyer because he argued with God?
Well, if you just arguing, you know, you could probably go back to Adam and Eve just for some arguing. But I like this story, Pastor's suggestion. I like that one too. I always think of Aaron as being the first lawyer because he then always spoke for Moses. So when Moses went before the Pharaoh, he brought his brother Aaron with him to speak. And that's what a lawyer does. A lawyer's a spokesman for someone. He speaks for someone who maybe doesn't know the law very well or who can't speak very well. Yes?
Does Pontius Pilate count as a lawyer?
No, I'd call him more of a judge.
Oh, man.
Yeah. He was more of a judge. Not a very good one, but he was a judge. And, okay. By the way, as long as we're talking about lawyers, this is a story that I heard at some time when I used to go to seminars, is they say that Jesus Christ was the first public defender. You know why? Because everybody was condemned until Jesus came. And Jesus saved us all from our sins, and he now speaks for us before the throne of God. And when God looks down at us, he sees Jesus through Jesus, and Jesus is white as snow. And so we stand behind Jesus, and all of our sins don't count. And God, all he sees is the whiteness of his son because of his son's act on the cross. And so what does he do? He defended us when we were all guilty as sin and of sin. So we say Jesus was the first public defender. Anyway, now here's a question I used to get because I did a lot of criminal cases, which means I defended bad people, or at least people that society said were bad. They might have robbed a bank. They might have been involved with drugs. They might have assaulted someone, shot someone. And the truth is, I represented people in a lot of murder cases. So those are the worst of cases. So you say, people would always say, how can you defend that person, that bad person? And they have the vilest names, the worst names they can call people. How could you do that, defend that person? Well, let me give you a parallel example. When a person is taken into the hospital and they've been injured, and the doctor comes into the room, the doctor doesn't say to the nurse that when he's brought in, doesn't say, but before I help this guy, I want to know if this is a good guy or a bad guy. The doctor doesn't do that. What's the doctor's duty? The doctor's duty is to help the person. Help the person. That is the code and the duty. The same thing is true for lawyers. When you pass the bar and you swear to be a lawyer and uphold the laws and the ethics of lawyers, your duty is not to assess whether your client's a good person or a bad person, nice. Your duty is to help the person. So how can you defend what most people call a bad person and be effective? Well, what is one of the ways that you as Christians show your belief? It's by setting examples, right? Isn't it by good behavior, by kindness, by doing things that are helpful to your fellow man? I don't know how many people I defended, and some of them that I got off turned their lives around after they were given a break and became better people. So, yes, you can be effective and help people and help them with their legal problems. Whether you're a civil lawyer or a criminal lawyer, you are helping other people by being a lawyer, even if other people might think that's a bad person. I thought it was a good profession that I was involved in. I thought I was effective and I enjoyed it. And I think I helped a lot of people. If you decide that you want to go to law, I see a lot of ladies here. There are now more ladies in law school than there were men. When I started, there were hardly any women. Now they're mostly women. So don't think about avoiding the law just because you're female. And it's true of medical school too. Most of the women are in medical school too. How about questions? Anybody got any questions about the law? Yes, sir.
I don't have a question, but I know something that probably people don't know, that's a law that most people don't know.
What's that?
It's illegal to drive in Washington while eating. A lot of people have done that, but they don't even know it exists.
What he said was, it's illegal to drive and eat at the same time in Washington. I don't know. It's illegal to drive and text. It's illegal to drive and talk on the telephone. That's the main things you need to learn. I don't know how many people drive and are texting at the same time. Yes, sir.
Have you ever gotten backlash for,
Say it again.
have you ever gotten backlash for defending a person that most people didn't really thought was good?
Backlash. That's a good question. I am sure that there are people that whispered behind my back that they didn't like what I was doing, especially if I represented someone who most people thought was guilty and he was acquitted, which means found not guilty. A lot of people didn't like that. But I will also tell you this. Some of my closest friends were police officers and sheriff's officers, and I knew all the sheriffs of this county. I was one of the people who was speaking for Ian Parkinson, who's the current sheriff of the county. I went to a lot of his political fundraisers when he was running for election because I was one of his closest friends. So just because I was a defense attorney doesn't mean that I didn't have a good relationship both with police officers, sheriff's officers, and people in the district attorney's office. So backlash, I suppose there were some people who said some bad things about me, but I thought I had a lot of support in the community. Yeah,
When did you decide to become a lawyer?
say it again.
When did you decide to become a lawyer?
A lawyer?
How old you were, I guess.
How old was I when I decided to become a lawyer? You know, when I was in graduate school back east, I got a master's degree back east. At that time, I was most interested in going into politics. And I was going to law school not to become a lawyer, but to use it as a stepping stone to get into politics, to run for political office. But I never did it. When I got to in fact, I came to San Luis Obispo County in part because this was a conservative county and I knew the guy who was in Congress here, and I thought maybe I would eventually run for Congress. But once I got here, I liked it so much here. I liked practicing law, and I saw how terrible it was to be involved in politics. And so I stayed with law. And I will say this might scare some people off. It's a very stressful occupation. That means, you know how you feel before you take a real difficult test? The stress you feel? Well, you feel it all the time when you're a lawyer. Other questions? Yes, Pastor?
More personal question. You said that some people, so you need to have a bachelor degree, then you go to law school, or maybe you go to master's school, like in your case, then you go to law school, then you take what is called bar test.
Bar
That's
exam.
the bar,
Yep.
or exam. You said that some people, they need multiple chances to take the bar exam.
Yep.
And there are, at least in my memory, there are a couple funny movies where the guy who became a lawyer, he was taking bar exam like 10 times or something like that.
I have heard that.
Okay,
You can take it twice a year.
Okay, my question is, how many times did it take you to pass the bar?
One.
See, okay? So
If
when
you
I
go to a
introduced
good
Val,
law
I told-
school,
I told you, you know, all people that would bring here, they are really high professionals, okay?
he didn't know the answer to that. What if I said 7?
I do my homework.
Yes.
So hypothetically speaking, if I don't go to law school or get any sort of degree, and then can I still take the bar test?
No,
No. So
Nope.
it is required.
you can't do it. No.
Okay.
You got to go to an accredited law school. In fact, there are some law schools that are not what we call accredited. You can go to them, and then halfway through law school, you have to take a baby bar exam, and you have to pass that first before you can continue your last year and a half, and then take the final bar exam. If you go to a good quality law school like UC Davis, Bolt Hall, Stanford, UC Berkeley, UCLA, USC, your chances of passing on the first time are about 75 to 80%. It's the people who go to these fly-by-night law schools that have much more difficulty passing the bar. Who had a question? Dominga.
Is there like a certain amount of tries that you need to do?
Say it again?
Is there like a certain amount of tries that you need to do before you can't do it anymore?
No, not that I know of. I think you just get eventually convinced that I'm just not going to be able to pass this thing. But yes, I have heard of people who took it 10 times,
And you can take it only twice a year.
twice a year.
So that means it took them 5 years to pass the test, at
If you
least.
took it every single time it was offered, it would take you 5 years to do it 10 times.
So bachelor.
You're getting
4 years,
older.
3 years of law school, let's say they went immediately to law school. And then on the top of that, you have 5 years of trying to pass the exam.
You're getting older.
Somewhat, yeah.
All right, well,
Okay, any more
I'm
questions?
suggesting, at least you know a little bit more about the law the next time you see some television program and see people arguing back and forth in court.
Well, you can also mention what Dominga and Raphael.
Dominguez and Raphael's mother is a lawyer, went to the same law school I did. She works for a big law firm in San
It's our
Francisco.
daughter, by the way.
And she does civil law only. Her firm works for insurance companies who defend claims of products liability, and which is a complicated subject. If you design a truck faulty and it gets in an accident, you can claim it's the product's fault and sue the company, Ford Motor Company, whatever. But that's what she does. She works for a big company and she does civil law.
Okay, thank you. Let's
Thank you.